Joining us for further analysis on what's playing itself out on that market scene is Muhammed Wagley from Sasfin Wealth. Muhammed, always a pleasure and a good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to yourself, Nolitanda, and thank you very much for having me.
All right, well, not a bad start to the week, I'd say. We are seeing majority green screens in South Africa. Europe, a little bit more choppy. I'm keen to get your thoughts on what has driven markets to this hour, but also this week.
Okay, so I've got to start by saying, I've got to agree with you. You know, we've started the week off quite well. I think we're up about 0.4%, and that's following on from last week, which was just a great week for the local market and really offshore markets as well. We picked up about 3.5% on the offshore last week, and in fact, if I take it back a little bit further, for the month of November, we're up 6.5%, and that's really great to see given the softness that we saw in the third quarter of the year, and then as well in October. So just broadly speaking, from my side, it definitely looks like we're seeing a bit more appetite for risk. But that being said, specifically with reference to the local bourse, the volumes remain quite weak. You know, we had a turnover of about 15 billion on Friday, and then today when I checked in the morning, it was less than 300 million. Obviously, you got to take into account that most of this happens in auction. We are seeing a bit of sentiment here, but the volumes do remain relatively weak. Just on the day, though, I would say that the big companies really underpinning the performance that we're seeing here today have got to be Naspers and Prosus. They've constituted about 25% of the volumes thus far, and both those tickers are up about 2%. So of the big companies, they've been among the standouts. And then I suppose we'll also touch on this a little bit later, but we saw PPC rise almost 9% on the back of their results a little bit earlier. Similarly, Netcare was also up on the back of their results. Astral Foods also had a decent return on the back of there. So yeah, so far looks good. Let's hope it continues.
I mean, let's talk about the week ahead as well. We do have a Fed minutes expected. I'm wondering if markets are looking for more clues from that, Muhammad. But also, it is Black Friday. It's a big one in the United States. And I'm wondering, you know, if this is, we've seen markets gearing up to lean in on the gains that could be made from this phenomenon.
Yeah, very much so. So I'll first comment on the meeting minutes. It seems the market's always looking ahead to Fed comments. Jerome Powell's probably been the most popular guy this year, well, last year as well. So yeah, we're going to be keeping an eye out for what comes out from the minutes. You know, given that sentiment's been pretty good, given that we've seen good performance over the past couple of weeks, or rather, let's say week and a bit, we'll be on the lookout for sort of anything negative, anything indicating that rate hikes, rate cuts rather, are going to start a little bit later on in the year. That's the sort of thing we're going to be keeping an eye out for. And then just in relation to Black Friday is always a big one, you know. I suppose specifically with regard to the retailers, I imagine the e-commerce guys are expecting a massive amounts of flows on the day. In fact, I've got quite a few plans for Black Friday too. But I think just to mention, the day before that, if I'm not mistaken, is Thanksgiving in the US, and I think that's also going to be somewhat relevant. So I'm not actually expecting the busiest week from a market perspective this week. We'll expect a bit more of a pickup in the following week, actually.
And we are expecting some announcements coming out of our own Reserve Bank here at home. I'm wondering if you have any expectations for that one.
Well, we're hoping that it's going to remain unchanged. We do think that is indeed the case, but, you know, they're always liable to change their minds. I think we'll also be looking for a bit of a, like with the Fed minutes, we're also going to be keeping an eye out for when those rates are going to start to come down. I think that's really the key thing for markets right now, both locally and offshore. That's really what we're keeping an eye out for. So hoping for good news in that regard.
All right, let's get into some company news. A lot happening today, Muhammad. I'm not sure if we'll get through all of it. Let's start off with the Barloworld. I mean, very impressive there. I think all those key metrics up in the green. Share price also being cheered on by investors, but not nearly as much as what I would have thought.
Listen, it's an interesting one that I think you actually hit the nail on the head when you mentioned that they sort of reached the targets that they were looking for. We saw quite a nice beat on the operating profit that came in at about 4.3 billion, and that was against estimates of I think it was 4 billion. Headline earnings per share came in pretty much exactly where the guidance said it would. It came in at the exact midpoint. I mean, that was around 11.63. Always great to see that. Another key takeaway was the operating profit margin increase. It's just under under 10% now. And, I think within the context of the tough operating environment, they were relatively bullish. I know they mentioned that they're quite positive about their Mongolia operation. It's not the biggest thing in their life currently, but they're expecting double-digit growth there. But I must confess, they are expecting a bit of a slowdown in the South African division, and that's really got to do with the slowdown that we're seeing in mining. But by and large, these were good numbers. You know what? I share your opinion. I thought it may have moved up a bit more, but coming in at about 0.8% the last time I checked up is not too bad, and there's still a bit of time in the day. So let's see where that goes. From my view, though, all in all, pretty good numbers.
Where I am also surprised, Mohammed, is with Astral. I mean, Astral has had, I would call, 24 months of absolute storms, from load shedding to water issues to avian flu and even a high input costs. They've reported losses of the profits, I think, far more than 100%, more than 140%. But that share price is up 2.91%. And I'm wondering what investors are making of the Astral story.
Yeah, well, I think you really hit the nail on the head there when you mentioned that, they've been under quite a bit of pressure over the course of the year, and by and large, most of that has been priced in. I think these results actually paint a picture of the company doing a little bit better than what was expected, given the context that it was expected to be sort of bad numbers. Now, you mentioned load shedding. That was a massive cost for them. They've associated nearly 1.6 billion rand worth of costs just to the load shedding. Now, any company that's operating out of South Africa, that this sort of cost remains very pervasive. We've seen it sort of in other numbers, not just, across the year, but even today, there's quite a few companies that had made reference to the same thing. Now, in addition to that, the avian flu outbreak was a really bad one. This is a specifically contagious variation of the flu. That also had a significant impact on the earnings, costing about 400 million rand. I mean, the outlook is that, the avian flu thing in particular is maybe not going to persist as long as people were, I guess, initially pricing it to. I can't remember who it was, but there was sort of a relevant agricultural type council that had mentioned that by and large we've seen the back of this. So I think, the outlook is a little bit better than expected. The company's taking measures to sort of mitigate these risks that have put a bit of pressure on them this year. And I think the market quite liked that. If I'm not mistaken, they were up about 1.2% on the back of these results, which I think is a case of the results weren't as bad as we expected them to be.
Markets also cheering on Netcare. They seem to have done really well. Profits up 27.2% there, Mohammed. But also, succession planning obviously in motion of sorts. We do have Dr. Richard Frieden staying on for a little bit longer. And I'm wondering if that also has to do with markets cheering on the counter.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely say as much. We're always looking for certainty. We're always looking for clarity. It's really the uneasiness or the uncertainty that market feels in relation to not knowing sort of who the long-term lead is going to be. That puts a lot of pressure on share prices in general. So I think it was a bit of a boon for the market to get a bit of clarity. If I'm not mistaken, we haven't got the exact details of who the successor will be, but we know that they've identified someone. They're just not able to take over at this current moment in time. And, I mentioned this earlier, let me just start by saying that, these numbers actually were quite good. They, again, hit all of their sort of operational and strategic targets. Revenue increased to about 23.7 billion rand. The EBITDA grew by nearly 18% to sit at 4.115 billion. And then again, we did see the sort of some increase in cost, and that was some of it was in relation to projects. Again, some of it was also in relation to load shedding. So these results, in my mind, painted a picture of a company doing well despite the challenging environment that they're sort of operating in. And then, going forward, they've actually taken significant measures to have sort of the load shedding associated costs not affect them as much. And then in addition to that, it's what you mentioned earlier, the certainty around the succession. All of that together served to be well received by the market. These results were quite well received by the market. The shares up about 3.4%, sort of as at the last time I checked a little bit earlier.
We don't have much time, Dave, but I must touch on PPC simply because of the move there. We are seeing that stock price up more than 9%. Back in the black for this company that has battled for a while. Just keen to get your quick remarks on this one.
Yeah, interesting. from what I can see, they're the big mover on the day, up just over 9%. And I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that they're coming off low bases. Now, quarter two was quite challenging. We saw lots of volumes pressure coming out from the Zimbabwe division, as well as locally in Botswana. And this quarter, they made specific mention to the strong recovery in the Zimbabwe division. Revenue is up over 100% over there from a comparable period basis. And they also declared a further dividend of about $7 million in PPC Zimbabwe this month. And I think that's in addition to the $4 million that was paid out relatively recently. They also pointed out that SA and Botswana were quite resilient this quarter. Again, they were also under quite a bit of volume pressure. So good to see that. And then just coming back to what we were saying a little bit earlier in relation to Netcare, they've also got a CEO who is on his way out. He'll be leaving at the end of the year, and he'll be replaced by Matthias Cardarelli. But this news is not relatively new. I believe this came out in August. So yeah, from my perspective, it really is a case of coming off quite low basis. So PPC's done quite well there.
Well, but keen to get your stock pick for today. Which counter would you be going with this Monday afternoon?
So I was actually on with Zenati on Thursday, and I was very excited to go for Meta Platforms, and I think I'm going to stick with that, truth to be told. I really like this share. You know, it operates in really all of the places that I'd like for it to be. You know, they're quite diverse in the AI space. In addition to that, you may have seen they came out with those Meta Quest virtual reality goggles. But also, you know, the share was really embattled in 2022. It went all the way down to $90 per share. Now they're currently over 300, and I still think that there's a lot of runway for it to go into, you know, especially going into the end of the year and then onwards in 2024. So I think it does make a lot of sense to at least have some of those.
Well, Muhammad, it's always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. That was Muhammed Wagley from Sasfin Wealth.